Hopefully you can still see that. And as I said, sorry, what I'll do is just start the ball rolling and then use the chat tool as well if you want to connect with people, perhaps for discussions afterwards, because within the time scale that we've got, we won't cover everything, but I thought we'll just start with an outline of what happens at the Botanic Gardens here in Auckland. So I'll just jump forward to here. So we've got a number of different ways that we provide chats, guided tours with our visitors. Primarily, we've got paid for experiences, which involve members of our visitor services team, who are the sort of the front of house people at the gardens. Those are paid for experiences, and we, as you can see from the information on the slide there, we've got two different price ranges. We've got a £6 per person for community groups. So that tends to be, it may be retirement villages, it may be gardening clubs, it may be certainly non-commercial providers, basically. If we get a cruise ship in and we know that that cruise ship is charging lots of money for other customers to come to the gardens, then we have a price bracket to increase that to a cost of £20 per person. And just to make it cost effective, you'll see that we have minimum group size and therefore minimum sort of pricing strategies. And we set an upper limit of 20 people because we find that anything more than that, it becomes a little bit too difficult to negotiate the gardens. When we're doing those tours, they are a little bit negotiable, but we'll tend to offer some packages that we know are common with our visitors, depending on whether they are international visitors, first-time visitors, or regular attendees at the gardens. From a volunteer delivery side of view, we don't tend to utilize our volunteers in guided tours to a large extent, but they do run and operate our little guided ride experience where the guiding element is probably limited to key features and an explanation of the general concepts of a particular garden, because the Wirry Rambler vehicle doesn't stop. It keeps moving through the garden, so it's more of an orientation. We find that quite useful in the sense that a lot of our volunteers are quite daunted about being guides in the garden, especially initially, and they feel as if they can't do that until they've been trained up. And what we tend to do is to try and explain to them, especially with the Wirry Rambler operation, that it's a very informal guided tour. You don't need to be a horticulturalist or a botanist to deliver these tours. It's more about your ability to engage with the visitors, especially for this product, which is aimed at family audiences. So there's lots of excited children, and the tour experience is really sharing the enjoyment of the garden. This is also a popular activity for lots of retirement homes and gardening clubs where perhaps mobility is a bit of an issue, and people can get to see the gardens and explore areas that perhaps they wouldn't be able to explore on foot. So that is all delivered by volunteers. All of that, the funds that they raise go into support further development of the botanic gardens, and they help staff as well to benefit from professional training. Could I just ask everybody to check that they're on mute? Thank you. Just to, excellent. I'll just go on to the next slide. The other thing that we do twice monthly is we offer what we call drop and learns, and I've just put our two most recent examples on there. We've got one coming up next week, which is a curator tour of the Paharikiki collection, and the one from last month was led again by our curator who looks after the African garden. So these tours are a little bit more specific, and they draw upon the expertise of the gardener who works in that collection on a daily basis. Those are free. They run for 1 hour. And as you can see from the photo at the bottom right there, we tend to get around sort of anywhere between 10 and 15 to 20 people coming in. I've been doing these tours for 3 years now, and what I've observed is that the weather and what is happening in people's lives generally dictates how many people we get on a tour rather than the actual content of the tour. So sometimes we develop content and we think this is going to be so well attended, and it's quieter. Other times we might just say, look, this is a seasonal tour of what looks good in autumn in the gardens, and we'll find that we get 20 to 30 people turning up for that. So I haven't quite figured out what determines that, but I think, as I said, the weather and what is happening is also plays a part as well as the content. So that's a very quick snapshot of what we offer at the gardens. And then I thought, just for discussion points, I've just got a few things that I think we should have in the back of our mind. Obviously, yeah, the first one is the mentoring and shadowing. What we don't do is we won't throw a new member of our visitor services team straight out into delivery. We will mentor them and shadow them and pair them up with somebody who is more experienced at delivery of the tours, so that they may come along and observe the tours and perhaps start to deliver components of that tour to start with. So it's a little bit of building their confidence, getting them proficient in the content, but also allowing them to add their own uh, passions and enthusiasm for areas. So I'm a great believer in passion is passionate, and people, enthusiasm spreads between the presenter and the guide. So we have quite an informal sign off. I know Auckland Museum, for example, has very rigorous standards, almost sort of examinations, and quite a sophisticated induction before they are delivering to the public. That's very much from a volunteer side. As I said, we tend to use staff rather than volunteers for our guided tour experiences. Uh, if we feel that somebody has some experience but is perhaps not confident in the delivery, we will pair them with somebody who is more confident in the facilitation, and allow the expert to almost to be brought in at appropriate times to share their knowledge. What we find is that visitors to the gardens really enjoy meeting the actual gardeners, the people, whether those are volunteer gardeners or paid staff, somebody who has a connection with the place and can share those daily or historical perspectives is something that our public really enjoy. And the last thing I'll leave you with before we start our discussion is really that balance between the guide's confidence and the audience's needs. We know that the visitors coming to the garden, sometimes we might get a phone call from a particular garden society who have a focus on it, maybe the rose garden or the magnolias or camellias. What we would tend to do is make sure that the person delivering that is probably one of our curatorial team, or perhaps one of our volunteers who has an in-depth knowledge in that area. But on the other hand, what we try to make sure is that if the visitor is after a general introduction to the gardens, then that's what we give them. So we're not rigid in our delivery of content, because uh, we want to match what we deliver to what our audience needs and expects. So I hope that's made some sense for you. I'll stop sharing now because, as I say, I don't want to keep talking for this whole time. I want to sort of have a discussion about this, and really we've got some large organizations here and some smaller gardens and some volunteer and friends associations. So we know that not everybody has a team of educators and facilitators to deliver this. So it's really trying to be realistic about what your organization can commit to, and then making sure that you don't throw them in at the deep end and leave them unsupported and stress them out, because what we want is, people who are confident and passionate about delivering and feel supported in doing so. And you can do this over small steps. So I hope that's made some sense. And if anybody would like to follow on with the discussion, that would be great. Otherwise, I'll be talking to the screen all the time. If anybody would like to join in, put your hand up. Or there we go. I've got Jane. Jane.
You can start, Jane. Yeah, hello there. I'm here. I'm here with Susan Lawrence. We're here in the Botanic Gardens in Christchurch. Susan is the coordinator for our guide, so she's just going to talk a little bit about how we have organised our guiding programme, which is pretty comprehensive.
Yes, hello everyone. We have a history of guiding in the Christchurch Botanic Gardens going back over 20 years. We've been very fortunate. We had a couple who pioneered it over 20 years ago and have run fairly comprehensive training courses, 3 or 4, maybe 4 over that time. And they gave up 4 years ago when I took over. And we have a team of about 20, just under 20. We need at least 20 to keep going. So a bit of a recruitment drive at the moment. And we have, since COVID, we restructured really, and we have a repertoire really of 20 different walks. We used to just do a general walk around the gardens and charge money. We've restructured and changed all of that. We have one daily free walk every day from October the 1st to April the 30th. That's our guiding season. And the guides are rostered on for that. And we have a monthly schedule of the different walks. And they are chosen according to the guide's availability and preference. Some walks we don't do so often. And then we have group walks as well, and they are run by one of our guides. She takes the bookings and does all the invoicing, puts out the call to guides to see who's available, and they're pretty regular over the season. So we make a bit of money from that. In fact, we've made $5,000 for the last 2 seasons, which goes through the friends back into the gardens. So we're a pretty close-knit team. We're all pretty passionate, and all the guides bring different skills to the operation. And we meet once a month for development meetings where we have a speaker or someone from the guides sharing in their particular area of expertise. And we have a lot of skills and talent amongst our team. So there's no shortage of input, there's no shortage of discussion and debate.
Certainly not. And luckily everyone has their specialty areas. So if you don't really want to talk about all the palms or the conifers, you don't have to, because there'll be someone else who actually really enjoys that too.
Although we are trying to encourage everyone to take a walk out of the too hard basket in the winter and hone up their skills in a new area.
Yeah. But we do have, there is a little caterpillar thing, a bit like your Wirrie Rambler, that operates in the gardens. It's actually operated by a tourism operator, though I think they do come up, their contract comes up for renewal next year. So we're debating whether we might put in a tender for that. And that is great for people who aren't as mobile. We're not quite as expansive as the Auckland Gardens, but if you're not that mobile, it's still a wee way to walk around as well. And we have access also to a wheelchair that people can push themselves in, or a mobility scooter from our visitor centre. So people can get around on those if they couldn't manage otherwise as well.
Yes, the mobility, the mobile operation is a tourist venture, so it's expensive. I think they charge $30 per adult, and it goes for an hour. And those drivers are trained, they have a set script, and it's pretty popular.
For your daily walks, what sort of attendance numbers would you have on a typical day, if there is a typical day?
No, it varies hugely, really,
Yeah.
depending on the weather. But then you can assume no one's going to turn up on a rainy day, and lo and behold, the tour guide arrives. Yes, they do turn up in the rain. I've had that several times.
What,
But it can be.
what was our final tally for this? Was it 700
we had
something?
about 750 people over that 6-month period, and that was
7 months. Yeah.
We advertise it it's either on our online on our website itself or under the City Council Botanic Gardens site saying what's on. So that's how, apart from boards that are outside our kiosk here, but that requires people coming in from the car park. And if you're a tourist, you come in at the other end of the garden. So we've got a little bit of a challenge there. And at the moment, we have the museum directly next door, which is being demolished internally. So it's a little bit tricky. That whole access thing is, we're still looking at other ways of advertising more efficiently there. But if you look at what's on, it'll come up in that.
And we do, yes, it's random. It's very random who turns up on the day. We had one guide doing a walk on plant hunters this last season. She had 17,
Yes.
which is a very big number for one person. I mean, I was interested that you have a maximum of 20. I would find 20 a bit overwhelming myself. 10 would be a big enough number for me, but she had 17. We might just have one. I love taking one person round.
Yeah.
Yeah, one thing that we do utilize if we get large numbers is we have a portable speaker and microphone system as well, so that we try to make sure that it protects the voice of the speaker, and it actually enables the visitors to hear, because there's always been a little bit of reluctance to using the microphone. Nobody likes having the microphone. They always feel a little bit self-conscious. But what we've done is we've actually refocus that to be an accessibility issue, that we need to ensure that our visitors can hear. So the microphone, suddenly, as soon as I pitched it as just like having a ramp access or wheelchair access, we're just making your voice accessible, and then suddenly everybody's, where's the microphone, let me have it. And that does make those larger groups more comfortable.
Yeah, we do have a microphone system, but it's not always that reliable. So we'd love to know from you, Paul, what system you're using, because we've struggled a bit to find the best one.
Yeah, it is on the agenda. We must get one eventually, and sometimes when we do group walks, they come with their equipment, and
which is great.
I find them absolutely marvelous.
Yeah.
Excellent. That's good. I'll share those details. I'll send it through. Roger, you had your hand up.
Thanks, Paul.
Oh, thank you, Jane Susan.
You can hear me all right? Yep. Paul, thanks very much, firstly, for this opportunity to get a conversation going around that specific subject of garden tours. I might just indulge you for a moment and just give you a bit of background as to how I'm sort of sitting here with you today. I'm president of a group called Friends of the Bunanyong Botanic Gardens, which is in Victoria, and we're about an hour and 20 minutes, half an hour, hour and a half from Melbourne to the west, and we're very close to Ballarat, if you know Ballarat. So Ballarat, of course, is a very well-known and high-profile regional garden with a long history. Bunanyong, I don't want to sound too derisive, but we're probably the poor cousin. We are a garden that was established in 1861, so it's got a good lot of history. It's only a small garden. It's got about a bit more than 10 acres, and that's all it is. 99% of the trees in the gardens are exotics. So it's quite an interesting little garden. It's probably more appropriately described as an arboretum than a garden per se. So we have a small group, Friends of the Botanic Gardens, of about 30 odd members. Most of them, as you wouldn't be surprised, are senior aging folk. I got asked to do a presentation at the last Friends of the Botanic Gardens, AAFBG, if you're familiar with that group, conference that was held at Bateman's Bay, about the idea of how do Friends of Gardens survive. You know, how are we going to keep going? How do we go with small numbers and aging memberships? So I approached that challenge by doing a fair bit of research before the conference, before I did my presentation. And I was quite surprised to realise the fact that whilst we hear a lot from the higher profile gardens, if you look in Australia, and I know that the same sort of pattern might exist in New Zealand, although you've got a lot fewer gardens, but you've got, at one end of the scale, you've got a group like Canberra, which has about 3,000 members. And at the other end of the scale, you've got groups in regional, say, South Australia, who have 5 members. Now, I have a strong, I really carry the candle for Friends of Gardens, because I think that the Friends of Botanic Gardens are in fact a very necessary, vital linkage between community and the gardens. And some gardens managements have a lot of staff and a lot of resources, and then the further you get away from the major centres, there ain't much there. I have found when I've gone around and visited gardens that the standards of tours is quite diverse. I'm hearing from this group today of what sounds like very well organised, and to some extent, certainly relative to our group, fairly well resourced setups for doing garden tours. But I've observed, just going around various places, particularly regionally, some garden tours are just someone walking you around saying, this is a tree A, this is a tree B, and they, you know, basically it's a bit of noise that you could have done yourself, because all they're doing is just taking you from tree to tree. They then, you know, sort of upgraded depending on the skill of the person doing the tour. They can be quite entertaining, and you get yarns along the tree. We have a wonderful person here in Bunanyong, and she also works at Ballarat as a volunteer. And I describe Lorraine as having a story for every tree in our gardens, and dare I say, every blade of grass. She's very well skilled at doing garden tours, but you know, she's a bit of a one-off. And then, you know, as you come more to the sorts of gardens that I've been hearing from you this morning, you get what I'd call, you know, quite professionally structured tours, educative, and, you know, the people doing the tours have good presentation skills. They've got lots of information, and quite often follow up with very good handouts and so on, and, you know, where to for the next step. So my concern is that across the board, there is an enormous diversity, and this group today is under the aegis of BGEN's. So I've approached BGEN's and said, can we start looking at not getting too academic about it, but how can we, across the industry, utilising the skills of people such as yourselves and the expertise, how can we start to look at ways that we can help the industry, or the, you know, gardens groups across Australia and New Zealand, to deal with the things that need to be done perhaps better, differently, under the heading of tours. So that's basically how I sort of ended up here today, to be part of a conversation that might feed back into BGEN's, and also with the resources of the Friends of Botanic Gardens groups, to start to actually raise the standard, and to identify really what these groups can do, what they can give to both to the gardens management and also to their relative communities. And as you've identified there, some fairly significant visitor groups such as cruise ships and specialised gardening groups and so on. So that's basically what my interest is. So I'm keen to hear how you go about doing it, but I'd like to think that through BGEN's we can actually start to pull some structure and some skills and expertise around the broader subject of garden tours. It's only going to get bigger. Even I had one group that I surveyed, the one that had 5 members, and I think they said at the time of the survey, we've got 5 members and 3 of them are in hospital. And, you know, it's a husband and wife who do this tour in this little country garden. But to me, that's as important as a big garden somewhere else. And it's interesting, particularly if you look at tourism. I work in an area that is very much part of tourism and hospitality. And the international market, of course, has not really come back yet since COVID. But in the next 3 to 4 years, the international market will be coming back, and there'll be a lot more interest from that sector in doing botanic gardens tours. And the other thing about that market is that what we're hearing is that what we understood as the market pre-COVID is going to be a very different market when they come back. It's going to be a more discerning market. They're going to be more specific in what they're looking for, and gardens are very much on their agenda.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for that, Roger.
Thanks.
Has anybody got any comments that they would like to add, or hands up if you've got anything? I think one of the things that I think is important, looking at the different scale between the gardens as well, is just that being realistic and authentic about what your current status of tours is. You know, don't overpromise. If it is a walk from point A to point B and very scripted, then, you know, make that clear, because that will still have an appeal to some people, but that sort of is you know, is just one way of delivering. And I think if you haven't got the resources to deliver anything differently than that, I still think that's a positive thing to offer. But what we can hopefully do through organizations like BGEN is share and at least expose people to what different gardens are capable of offering, even if it's not something that everybody can immediately adopt and deliver themselves. Anybody else from any of the other gardens? Oh, you're just on mute, I think. Anybody else? Anything to contribute?
Sorry, sorry, I was trying to get myself off mute and it wasn't wanting to do it. I think, so Naira here from the Brisbane Botanic Gardens at Mount Cootha. I think it's one of the biggest things for us is knowing our audience. So we've got two botanic gardens and an arboretum here in Brisbane, from which our volunteers work in. And the nature of the people sort of coming through those different gardens is quite unique. So the sort of presentation that attracts the people to the Mount Cootha Botanic Gardens is different to the demographic that go to the Arboretum and the City Gardens. And I can't, I guess, support enough that comment about tailoring what you present to your site, and making the most of what your particular gardens sort of offers. And I mean, knowing your demographic really well. So from my experience, our city gardens, which is in fact in sort of or adjacent to the CBD, there's a focus there on the history, on the unique history of that site, because that particular botanic gardens is the site of the colony vegetable garden. So when Brisbane was settled and established, the convicts worked in that space. Our very first curator in that space was responsible for examining the economic potential of Australian natives, as well as looking at exotic plants that had potential to be crop and economic species for Queensland as a colony. So there's very much that focus on the historical aspect. You know, the very first macadamia nut ever sort of grown specifically to look at its potential as a food crop was planted at that gardens. So there's these very unique aspects of there that people are very interested in. And because it's close to the city, a lot of people want to come over and spend, say, lunchtime having a look around and exploring. So it's almost like a quick dip into it. And that's very different than from us at Mount Cootha, where we've got a little bit more of a conservation feel. We've also got a much broader sort of range of collections to sort of look at, and people can spend a little bit longer there. And the sort of program that we would offer in the city would not work for us at Mount Cootha, and vice versa. So I think knowing your target audience, knowing your own site, and then fitting something that will punch hard at those two things, you're actually going to take the best advantage of what you've got. And that needs to be very evident in your advertising for what you're sort of advertising, so that people need to be very clear on what they're getting. So yeah, definitely support the comments that sort of Paul has made in that space.
Perhaps I could just chime in there as well. I like hearing words like demographics and so on. One of the things I think is that most of the gardens I speak to, they are reactive to the inquiries that come in for doing tours. They don't do anything much by way of actually going out and, put it crudely, touting for business. We have an interesting situation at Bunanyong where we are right next door to the primary school. So they're our neighbours, of which there are about 600 students. So it's a big primary school. And of course, that's a great geographical asset for us to have right next door, because I firmly believe that you get them young, you get them young and you've got them forever. But then we notice that, well, if you're talking to year twos, it's a very different group to talking to year sixes. So you need to understand those sorts of things. But I think you certainly need to understand who your market is and who you might seek to get. I mean, the thing is that interest in gardeners is so diverse that you can be looking right across a whole cross section of a community and find all different things. And it then, of course, gets back to what your resources are, how many people you've got, etc., etc. But I guess, again, what I'm saying here is that I think there's so much that can be shared between all the gardens with their experience of how they go about their garden tours. I'd like to think at some stage, and this is sort of big scale thinking, that perhaps through BGENs or some industry group like that, there can even be sort of some benchmarking done and some basics for training and information made available right across Australia and New Zealand to help groups improve what they're doing in that garden tours area.
Thanks, Roger. Jane, did you have your hand up again, or was that still left up?
There you are, I'll let you go.
I was just going to pick up on the demographic, because after COVID, when we restructured and produced all these individual walks into different parts of the gardens, we were really hoping to attract the locals, having provided walks for tourists over nearly 20 years.
But general walks.
Yeah, they were general walks. And we had a bit of initial interest, but it settled down to pretty well mainly tourists who are our customers, and quite a busy season last season. And I think you say that it's going to get bigger. It probably will, but we're certainly providing a service for the tourists, no doubt about it. We also do walks in another public garden, which is run by the Christchurch Botanic Gardens, called Mona Vale. And there's been a bit of interest in Mona Vale recently because there've been quite a lot of substantial plant thefts. Mona Vale is a place that is loved by the locals, and they walk through it regularly. They're allowed to walk dogs, take bicycles, which you're not allowed to do here. And we do guided walks there, and our customers are nearly always locals. So it's lovely to have that local connection, but we do get locals on our tours, but more often they're from overseas. And I think one of the key things is engagement with the customers. Rather than, I don't see it looking at the demographic. I see it as providing a really good experience for the customers, and that's often a two-way thing. Often we come away having learnt something, talking about, you know, what's popular in their own part of the world, and sharing experiences. So we see ourselves really as ambassadors for the Christchurch Botanic Gardens. And
Excellent.
yeah.
But just also,
Sorry,
sorry.
go on, Jane.
I was just going to say also in relation to, you were talking about how do we gather resources and information. What we've done in just over the last few months is, because we've got that long history of 20 years worth of interesting resources, but we've fine-tuned it over the last couple of years now. We've put all of that information, or in the process of putting that all onto a Google Drive. So the Google Drive holds our monthly roster. So if you need to change something, you can see who's there and change it, which makes it easy for all the guides. But also all the resources are eventually going to be put on there as well. So if you're suddenly finding you're asked to do a walk in XYZ, you can look up and get some additional information there, which has been tailored really for doing one of these guided walks. And that is starting to work really well. So it's just a good way of using some of the technology for sharing resources with a group of volunteers. Yeah.
One thing that I thought might be useful is when we're talking about audiences as well, one of the things that we're starting to think about is aligning what we might offer as a guided tour experience with a larger festival or event that's happening within Auckland. So, you know, for example, if it's a heritage festival or a cultural festival taking place, if there's a story that you can offer that will bring in a new audience and get them to experience, but with a lens that is sort of, you know, unique to both your venue and the wider festival. And what that allows you to do is to piggyback onto all of their marketing and promotion. So, you know, for example, our library is staffed by volunteers. The big heritage festival coming up later in the year, what we've done straight away is said we will open up, you know, some rare botanical books as part of the heritage festival. So we haven't had to do anything really different, and we might only offer that tour once this year, but it's just getting into the habit of looking around what you can do to widen your audience and tailor your tours. And it might be a special project that, you know, somebody within your group would, you know, would have that passion to work that up a little bit. So that's just something that we've started to concentrate on a little bit more, because we see all of these where a bit of a, as I assume lots of gardens are, you know, we get the brochures for all of the large events that are happening, and I always feel that we should be in there aligning with those as well. I've got Jasmine's hand up.
Hi,
Hi,
so
Jasmine.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, so we're from a very small regional botanic gardens. We don't have a lot of extra staff, like our whole staff team is quite small, and we don't currently have any visitor services volunteers who used to do the tours. Are many of you running things like digital tours or self-guided tours, that sort of thing as well, or any, you know, help or ideas around getting some people that can run some tours in a smaller sort of region? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. Obviously, yes, we offer a range of self-guided tours and trails that you can come in and pick up, and they will guide you around whether it's sustainable water usage or pest plants, that kind of thing. We also have a number of digital tours that when you come and the orientation maps are there, you can scan a QR code that will take you through to our app. And we use a platform called Story, which is it's a sort of industry, it's across cities and galleries and zoos, and that used to be driven a lot by QR codes. So it's story, but the O is a Q, if that makes sense. So it's STQRY, and that's a platform where it's a very simple technology to create a tour, and you can put a trail out there. We don't have huge uptake from our digital tours. I think what we found really is that people like to connect with people, and I think that's one of our strengths, that we are fortunate to have that resource. But the digital trails are, they're, in my opinion, they're the sort of second choice for our visitors. They will do that if they haven't got a person to be with them. I don't know if anybody else has got any experience on that, following up with what Jasmine talked about.
Oh, look, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. I think Jasmine's probably a lot closer to where we are at Bunanyong in terms of the scale of the garden we are. We are, through the City of Ballarat, we are involved with the IRIS program. And I think that, and the one that you were describing, Paul, I think they will come into their own over time, because we're at this stage where the markets are going to get younger. The markets. I talk about the millenniums, the Gen Ys, who are now the largest sort of mobile sector within internationally, basically. And I think that's one of the problems we have with our gardens groups, is that there's a yawning gap between we post sort of baby boomers and dare I say older, and then your Gen Ys and then you've got the Gen Zs and so on. So we have to become more aware of what's going to motivate those people. And I think probably we do need to become a little bit more savvy about a lot of those online type of products, and utilizing the QR codes and so on. It's tough. It's tough for most people who are sort of in their 70s and 80s, because we're basically saying, well, you either just keep doing the things you're doing, or if you're wanting to champion the future, you might have to get to become more familiar with some of this stuff and how you can leverage it to the benefit of our gardens and the benefit of our upcoming customers. I mentioned sort of working with young people before. I started out a long time ago in the ski industry, and I always thought the ski industry was all about young people having great times on the slopes and après ski and so on. But I discovered that the ski industry puts most of its marketing dollars into marketing to kids, because they are the ones. And there's a huge nexus, of course, between kids and their grandparents. So there's a lot of dynamics that we can work on, but I think it's only going to come out of all the different groups sharing what they know, and then looking at essentially a plan for the future.
Excellent. Jane, did you have your hand up?
You were sure.
We were just going to mention, in terms of how can you produce something. I agree. I think the digital thing is a little bit too far removed, unless you're going to be in some garden somewhere that there just is no other information. But here we have at Christchurch Botanic Gardens, they, being the council, so a bit of money behind them, do produce a seasonal brochure, spring, summer, autumn, winter, which is we keep that, we're seated here in the kiosk, which is the first building you come to in the gardens, but rather than the visitor information centre. But that's using something like that for people, which has got a map of the gardens in the middle, is a useful one. For smaller gardens, it could still be produced and using the same ones, but then producing brochures is of course expensive. Printing is expensive, so it's not always the ideal one. If that was digitalized, that's another possibility. But what we've also done as the Friends is produce some brochures of special interest, and one of them is Rongai Maori medicinal plants. So that's the traditional plants that Maori have used, which are growing in the gardens. So that happens to be one of I think something like 2,000 of them disappeared in 1 year, because that's something people were, as in given out to people that people were really interested in. We've also got a commemorative tree one. I think the councils, that's Trees with Plaques, and the councils put out a notable trees one, you know, smallest, biggest, tallest, widest, whatever. That's one that seems to attract people quite a bit. Any other ones? I don't think there's any other.
Those are
ones.
those specialised ones.
And we do have a brochure on Mona Vale, the other garden that Susan mentioned as well. So that is helpful as a bit of a self-guided one. But also the council has, again, it's council funding, and you know, they're crying poor, but they've put out a whole lot more notice boards now, interpretation boards, I think is the term now, around the garden, which does help in your touring, but you still need to know where to go. And one of our biggest problems here actually is getting people to find their way to where we are, because it's at the far end of the gardens from the main entrance where the tourists come in. And signage is not great. We don't have a lot of pencil signs, there's maps, but then you've got to be able to find out still how to get to places. I think that's one of our biggest issues actually, is people finding us. Yeah, and I'm not, well, yes, digital maps might be a better way to go on that one too. It's a tricky one. And again, some of the demographics, you're looking at older people who don't necessarily don't want to follow something on a phone with their head down. If it's a younger generation, yes, that wouldn't be a problem. But I think for older people, definitely not also. But I think that the face-to-face is definitely the way to go.
I'm just thinking aloud here, but it does sound as if there's some potential for targeting intergenerational learning as well. You know, that you might offer a grandparent and grandchild, and suddenly the child is the expert on the phone and can be the leader. So you know, you could flip that quite easily and play about with that. So that's
absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, all of these things have got costs attached to them, unfortunately. You know, the story is not a free device. Back to Jasmine's initial question, without wanting to sound too cynical as well, you know, have you got any high schools or tertiary institutions that are looking for venues in order to test things that they have to develop or create with a real audience, you know, so that I've done that. My background is in museum work, and you know, we've worked with local colleges and universities where, as part of their study, they need to create a form of interpretation, and we've sort of guided them to create something which benefits our visitors, benefits them as students, and probably doesn't have the same cost implications of going to a commercial business to do that. What you've got to do there, though, is commit enough time from staff to ensure that it is appropriate, and you're not exploiting the students, and you're also developing something that is of benefit to the visitors and of an appropriate standard. But it's another way to potentially look at getting new technology and seeing whether it works for you or not. I hope that helped, Jasmine.
Yeah, I think a little bit. I think it's a lot of it's just the challenge of not having the staff to sort of run the personalized tours, because I mean, even myself, I think that, you know, a personalized tour is a lot nicer where you can ask questions, get answers, opposed to like a digital or self-guided thing. And it's usually a lot more informative as well. And I feel like we do have people interested. We just don't have the resources to really produce them regularly. That's probably the main thing, is trying to find a way to find the resources somehow, or if there's a smaller versions that we can create that's not too intensive on their time and the stuff for the staff. Just sort of trying to get ideas.
Can I ask Jasmine? I reckon you're not from New Zealand. Is that a good guess?
Yeah, no, we are Central Queensland.
Okay, all right. So
Central Queensland.
You're sort of north and we're south in Australia. Possibly, I wouldn't mind having a conversation with you off camera or later on, because it probably size-wise and so on, we may be quite similar. Question I'd ask the group generally is much work done by way of getting feedback and in a formalised way? We're all sick to death of filling out surveys and so on, but unfortunately, unless you gather that kind of feedback one way or another, and it might be informally just by chatting to the people after a tour or something, but are we collecting much data from people at the end to see what the responses are like, and have they got suggestions, etc.?
Well, we haven't had too many tours running lately, just because we haven't had the staff. We've done a couple of small tours, some with schools and some with just groups that were interested in just like a basic information around the gardens and that. Yeah. Probably didn't get as much feedback as we should have pressed for. I feel like we could have really asked them a lot more questions afterwards that we didn't really think about until too late. But yeah, it's been a while since we've had regular tours, just because we haven't had the people, the volunteers, the staff, any of that to really go on.
Yeah, we at Auckland, I give out little evaluation forms at the end of sessions, and one thing I've noticed, and it sounds obvious, but make sure you take lots of pens or pencils with you, because it's a good way to get initial feedback straight away. Because if you give a form to somebody and you give them the ability to complete it there, they're more likely to to tick it and give it to you, rather than they'll put it in their pocket or their bag and they don't get around. So that's just a little tip that I always try and remind myself, to make sure I've got a big fistful of pens as well when I'm handing out the evaluation forms. Jane, you had your hand up.
We were just going to mention about more of that interaction with young groups as well in the school holiday times. Again, it is run through the council, admittedly, so that's paid employees being able to do this. They do run holiday programs for the children, and often it's ones that involve use of the garden. So that's really bringing in that young group, which then brings in caregivers, parents, everything else as well. And there's another group that meets here at this same kiosk called Enviro Hub. They have a kids bot, I think it's called. It's a Saturday morning program for younger children again too. So I think actually there's maybe a morning one on a Monday.
They've got 10,000 on their mailing list. It's huge.
So they've been doing a lot of other things to try and bring in more of those younger people, but as I say, with accompanying parents as well. And I think I've really noticed, I mean, huge numbers of families will come through here as well too. So I'm just thinking, the other way of bringing more people in for that visitor experience as well. And particularly if you do some kind of, I was thinking for those smaller gardens, again, I know it relies on quite a bit of work to organise it, but like trails around, who doesn't love a treasure hunt? So trails around gardens, which then makes kids go and look for different things within that garden, is a really fantastic way of introducing children to think about even looking at gardens. So just a thought for the ones where you're time poor.
And we're sometimes involved in those activities too, but they have a pretty big team at the council who initiate quite a few of these programs. And they do have someone in the education department, and they organise primary school groups into the gardens. They have that area in the native area with all those decaying logs, and they learn about insects and decay. And that's just one example of probably many.
But whether you could get your local council to get involved a little bit as well too, if or whoever. Are your gardens run privately, owned privately?
Yeah, no, so we are part of the council.
Okay.
Yeah, but I feel like we don't have huge amounts of funding. But we do still run like the school holiday programs. We usually try and do at least 5 different days of activities throughout the school holidays.
Great. Yeah.
We've also got the Tiny Tots the first Wednesday of every month, which is just under 3s to come into the gardens with their parents and just play on our little toys and that we set up, just to be out and about in the gardens in the fresh air. So I mean, there's those activities, but not so much of a information educational tour of such for probably the people that are more wanting information and more of the garden experience of learning and that side.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm definitely hearing is, the importance on that audience, knowing your audience. So if you've got a lot of young families coming in, then that sounds like that's where you should be putting your content for your guided tours or trails, whatever you're delivering. And if it's vice versa, if a lot of your visitors are retirees or seniors, coming during the week time, then perhaps offering something that is likely to appeal to that audience is the best use of your time if it's limited. That you want success. I think there's nothing worse than, and I know, I think Susan, you mentioned, a one-on-one tour is fantastic, and it's a luxury for that person, and it's also really good because you get a lovely time to connect with the other people. But if you can get something that has a bit more mass appeal at some times as well, it helps to boost the numbers, because I suppose, again, cynically, we're in that numbers game as well as the actual connection with the people to balance. But I think we've got about 1 minute left, so I just wanted to say thank you for coming and attending online, and I hope it's useful, because we're still new to trying these sort of online chats, but I can see in the chat that people are making connections and asking questions as well. And that's the whole point of this. We can't cover and complete a topic in this time, but at least we can start to get ideas and exchanges and make connections with people that you might want to follow up with. So I think on that note, that's my timer going to say that we're just about done. So does anybody have any burning issues before we finish today?
Could I just ask, Paul, was there anyone else from New Zealand in our discussions?
I don't think today. I think it may
No.
just have been us. It varies.
Flying the
fine.
flag.
Okay, that's great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coordinating that. Anyway.
Lovely.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
I'll finish now, and I'll send out a recording, the details of the recording as well. Cheers. Have a good afternoon.
Right.